Hey folks, thanks for being right on time. We're waiting for Dave, our panelist, to join us, and then we'll do some intros and get started. Oh, there's Dave.
Hello.
Hey Dave, how are you?
Doing good. How are you?
All good, all good. We've got some folks trickling into the room, but I usually give people till 5 minutes after, and then we'll do our intros and then hand it over to you. That sounds good.
Okay. Well, I'm going to add one more slide while we're sitting here because I had one more idea and I was like, do I have time to add it? And I'm like, yeah.
Sure do, sure do. All right, seeing some more people joining us. We're going to get started at 5 minutes past. So if people want to grab a snack, some water, use the bathroom, feel free. Thanks for joining us. Everyone, we're gonna wait another 2 minutes, but feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Yeah, nice to know who's here, where people are joining from, how you've been enjoying the co-op so far. If you have any questions, you can also ask those in the chat and I can help you out. But give folks another 2 minutes to hop on, take a break in between.
And Seth, I'm good for screen sharing. Awesome.
Yeah, you're a panelist, so you should have all the powers. Okay, I'm going to get started with our little introduction and then pass over to you, Dave. But hi, everybody. Welcome to our session titled Mapping Campaigns, Mapping Police Tech in the Atlas of Surveillance and Other Open Source Research. I'm going to be the moderator for this session. My name is Seth. I use he, him pronouns. And I'm a climate campaigner with Greenpeace US and part of our working group for the Data Activist Co-op. Really excited you all are joining us, seeing lots of folks from other sessions from yesterday and this morning. So that's super exciting. It's really important to us, like in this whole event, to maintain a respectful and safe environment. So we just ask folks to be kind and considerate in the chat. And if you come off mute, to ask questions in our discussion space. We're going to have lots more sessions today going through 5 p.m. Eastern, and then our whole last day tomorrow, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern. So I hope you check out some of the other presentations and take a look. Today with us, we have Dave Maass, who is the Director of Investigations at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And Dave researches and writes about surveillance technology, government transparency, press freedoms, the US-Mexico border and immigration enforcement, prisoner rights, and lots of other digital rights issues. Dave leads the Atlas of Surveillance project in partnership with the Reynolds School of Journalism at the University of Nevada, Reno, where he is a Reynolds Scholar in residence. And then Dave, before you take it away, would you rather folks ask questions throughout, or kind of we'll do them all at the end? What would you prefer?
Throughout is just fine. If Seth, if you could field them and let me know when people are asking questions, because I just can't monitor comments. And if it's something I'm going to get to or something better discussed at the end, I'll just tell people we can discuss it at the end. Because some of the questions usually come up are good to answer quickly. Some of them I just don't want to derail too much from the thread.
Absolutely, that sounds perfect. So folks, if you'd like to ask questions as we go in the chat, I can bring them up to Dave, or if you ever want to come off mute and ask and go, have a little bit of discussion, you can either raise your hand or just write so in the chat, and I'll promote you to a panelist so that we can do it that way. We've been having some great conversations. So wonderful. All right, over to you, Dave. Take it away.
Excellent. All right, folks. So I have a bit of a slideshow that we're going to run with today. I tend to belong to the school of including extra text on slideshows. It doesn't make for the best visual presentation, but I know in this day and age, a lot of people are just referring back to the slides later on anyways, and I want to make sure people don't get a lot of decontextualized information. I'm going to go ahead and load this up so y'all can see it. And Seth, if you could just confirm that it is visible to folks.
Yep, looks great, and it's presenting out too.
Perfect. Excellent. So I'm going to be talking about crowdsourcing and mapping, particularly in the framework of our Atlas of Surveillance project. However, I want to emphasize that while I'm talking to you about our particular project and the Atlas of Surveillance, in my mind, our project can be scalable, it can be transferable. If you wanted to use the general idea that we started with for any number of issues outside of police surveillance, I think it definitely can be translated. And so I do hope that you'll learn a little bit about police surveillance technology from this talk, but my bigger goal here is for you to come away with ideas for you to apply to your own data projects, no matter what the topic is that you're researching. So some little background about EFF and myself. The Electronic Frontier Foundation has been around since 1990, and we exist to make sure that people's rights and freedoms are not only protected, but enhanced as technology grows in our society. We're a group of lawyers and activists and researchers and technologists who all come together to champion privacy, free expression, and innovation through all sorts of different means. We kind of attack from all angles, whether that's suing the FBI, deconstructing some apps, building things that you can use in your browser to protect your privacy, or getting laws changed. There's a whole variety of techniques that we used in our advocacy. Wrong direction in the slides. All right. I particularly sit on a team called the Threat Lab. This is our unofficial mascot, the Threat Labrador. But basically at the Threat Lab, we do deep dive investigations into surveillance technologies, particularly as they're used to spy on journalists, activists, and other targeted or vulnerable populations, be it immigrant populations, domestic violence survivors, or people seeking abortion access. We tend to look at how surveillance technology might be used to oppress these populations. My particular specialty at EFF is what we call street level surveillance. And these are all the different kinds of technologies that law enforcement uses within their communities. You'll have seen some of these come up before. I'm going to just go over a brief overview of some of these technologies, to highlight some of the common ones. But I think you get a sense for a lot of you who are working in this space, who are engaged in protests, who maybe have some history like Greenpeace does with police surveillance. Some of these technologies are going to be familiar to you. But some of the ones that we particularly focus on are like body-worn cameras. People often think of body-worn cameras as an accountability tool that are meant to make sure that cops are on their best behavior and you can prevent them or capture them on camera engaged in brutality. But really, these are a surveillance network. These are turning cops into essentially a mobile camera network where they're capturing information on just bystanders, or at protests and capturing information on people at protests, and then applying that video footage to other kinds of automated video analysis, such as face recognition. Automated license plate readers. This is something I work on a lot. These are cameras that document the movements of your vehicle. They just sort of capture your license plate, attach a timestamp, a GPS code, and upload it to a database. So somebody can put in your driver's license, or not your driver's license, your license plate, and see your travel patterns, where your car was spotted on camera over a period of time. Or they can add your vehicle's license plate to a watch list. And as a police car is driving around with one of these cameras, they'll get an alert when your car has been spotted. Biometrics really been hot in the news the last few years. Face recognition is using, essentially a fingerprint of your face to match it against a photo database in order to identify you, often without your consent. And another one that's been really hot lately is gunshot detection, particularly a product called ShotSpotter, which involves installing sensors around communities. And these sensors purportedly listen for loud noises that could be gunshots, then triangulate the position of that suspected gun going off, and then dispatch police there so police can respond more quickly. This can often make mistakes. ShotSpotter has been engaged in some suspicious practices regarding their involvement with police. And there's just this worry that a sensor will misidentify something as a gunshot and put somebody innocent or vulnerable in a deadly situation. Now at EFF, because a bunch of us are experts on this surveillance technology, we are getting calls all the time from journalists, researchers, just your regular community activists, and they usually have a couple of very common questions. And the first question is, hey, what police departments across the country are using face recognition? Or what police departments across the nation are using drones? They're researching one particular technology, and they want to see how it is spread across, the entire United States. The second question we get asked all the time is kind of more localized. It's usually either a local reporter reporting for their local newspaper, a local community activist, and they're asking, I live in the city of New Orleans, or I live in the city of Reno, Nevada, or I live in Los Angeles. What are all the different kinds of surveillance tech in the police arsenal? Like, what is the broad range? So not focusing on one technology, but wanting to look at all the different kinds of technology. Now, EFF for years has tried to answer these questions. Sometimes it's just a matter of me saying like, hey, let me Google that for you and I'll come up with a list. But I'm going to go over the three, sort of organized ways that we've tried to gather this information to build out, to answer these questions. So like, for example, here's something about drones, asking the question, well, who has drones in the United States? Now, back in 2013, this was a hot question. Barely any police officers had drones. And so what we did is we sued the FAA to get a data set of everyone who had applied for a drone permit, every law enforcement agency that had applied for a drone permit. So often if we're able to get a data set that exists, that shows all of that technology, that's like a real shortcut, because then we can map that out based on that data set. But oftentimes there's not data sets. So one of the things that we've done is we've had these these crowdsourcing events with members of our community. It often happens in person, but online. And we usually come up with like an assignment system where we give people, something that we want them to do online. And then they do these like little assignments as a group, and we might do like a 2 or 3 hour sprint. So back in 2016, there had been a new law passed in California that required every government agency in California to post an index of all of their database systems, like everything that they use to collect information on members of the public, and that they had to be like a link on each of their websites. So we just made a list of every agency in California, and we would give out these assignments to people, and all they had to do was one by one, go to a website, look for the link, post the link to our spreadsheet. And that's how we were able very quickly to go through hundreds and hundreds of agencies in just a couple of hours. And then finally, the other real main method that we've used is FOIA requests and public records requests, where we have developed this practice, often in partnership with Muckrock, of doing these massive public records requests. We might send out 50, 100, 1,000 requests in one go to try to gather information. This is a very slow process. It's not very comprehensive. If we send out 100 requests, we're lucky if 30 of them provide records in response, but that's still 30 agencies we gather information on. And then kind of one other element I'd sort of flag is that sometimes we can pass laws that makes this easier for us. So one of the things that the ACLU and EFF and various other organizations have been promoting is something called a CCOPS ordinance, CCOPS, or Community Control Over Police Surveillance. And this is a local ordinance that a city or county might pass to require all surveillance technology to go through a public hearing and to get voted on by a city council or county commissioners. And one of the outputs of this process is often you get an inventory of all the different pieces of technology. So this is from San Francisco, where we passed a law requiring this kind of disclosure. And so here we go. Like, people want to know, what are all the technologies that San Francisco Police Department has? Well, we've passed a law that requires them to post that online. So it's all there. Now, there's a third question that we're asked all the time, or at least we were asked all the time, because we've now finally answered it. Now, a few years ago, the question was, Dave, how come there isn't like a website that answers all of my questions about law enforcement agencies and what technologies they have? Why isn't there a central index? How come I have to go to you and you have to do a bunch of Googling and FOIA requests and data work and crowdsourcing? Why doesn't it just exist? And that's because, you know, we have a government set up in the United States where you have cities and counties and states and the federal government, and none of them are communicating with each other. There's never been the motivation for transparency. So there just isn't a central hub. And then as far as a local a nonprofit building such a hub, well, when people would ask me about that, I would say, you know, we've tried. It would really take a cast of thousands to really pull this together, because there are 18,000 police departments in the United States. Each of them could have like up to 10 technologies. That's just a huge undertaking. And I didn't think it was possible until now, or actually until about 2019. And in 2019, the University of Nevada, Reno's journalism school came to us and said, hey, you know, we've got, you know, some funding to do a partnership. Can you think of any kind of research project that you could do with upwards of 150 students each semester? And these students would be of often not very far along in their academic career. So they need something really basic. And I was suddenly like, yes, 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 I have an idea. Let's build this inventory that everybody's been asking for. We can come up with a way for all of these 150 students to, you know, each semester to do, you know, a few little assignments that actually build a bigger overall project. And on top of that, I was hoping that we could build a system that would mean that we would never have to say no to a volunteer again. So we get contact, like a lot of your nonprofits, people probably contact you and say, hey, I want to volunteer. And you're just like, we don't have any volunteer opportunities. We just don't have any work. But if we could create this infinite research system, then we could just tell people, here's something you can do it for a half hour, do it for 5 hours, do it for 3 weeks, do whatever you want. So the two project goals of the Atlas of Surveillance were, first of all, to create this searchable inventory, you know, a hub that people could go and use, particularly journalists, policymakers, and members of the public. But then we also wanted there to be this sort of sub goal that by building the system where people are able to collaborate with us, that we're actually inspiring a huge number of people, both students and volunteers, by having them be part of the program. Now, one of the underlying assumptions of our Atlas of Surveillance project is that while some people believe that surveillance technology is really secret, it's really not that secret. It's online, and it just hasn't been aggregated. There's news articles that will reference technology in almost every city. Agencies will often put out press releases. Companies will often put out press releases bragging when they've sold, you know, drones to some police department. Things are often buried in meeting minutes and in procurement documents. You can go through like the marketing materials for a surveillance vendor and see who they're referencing. Even like social media, you can just go on their Facebook page of a police department and find out information. And again, there are FOIA docs that, you know, you could request yourself, but like organizations like Muckrock just post thousands and thousands of public records requests online, and you can just go find what other people have already asked for. So there are three main data sources in the Atlas of Surveillance. One of the data sources is from crowdsourcing. And this is what I'm going to focus on a lot during the rest of the talk. But when I say crowdsourcing, I'm talking about giving these micro research assignments to students and volunteers. And I'll show you how that practically works. And if we have time towards the end, maybe we can even try one. We also look for existing data sets that might exist and bring them under one roof. For example, Bard College used to have a Center for the Study of the Drone, where they had built a data set of 2,000 government agencies that use drones, and we just ingested that data set. They shared it with us, and we just put that into our own data set, which made us like leap forward 1,000 data points pretty easily. And then also, we are constantly filing public records requests, but with the University of Nevada, Reno, we also teach a FOIA class. And so we have students in the FOIA class file public records requests related to that. Okay. So I also want to sort of tell you one other thing about crowdsourcing and something that's always inspired me. I went on a YouTube binge for a while about Penn and Teller have this reality show called Fool Us. If you haven't binged the show, or at least binged the little sequences on YouTube, highly recommend it. Good time killer, very fascinating. But essentially, this is a show where Penn and Teller, sit there, and each episode there are like 10 magicians or 5 magicians who all do a trick for them and try to fool them and how it's done. And something that I noticed that Penn and Teller, Penn would say, because Teller doesn't speak, but something that Penn would say every once in a while is when a magician came up and he was doing his trick and he brought somebody from the audience up and then had the member of the audience actually do the trick in their hands. And he was always so impressed about this, and I'm paraphrasing him, but he would always say something like, there's something special about an illusion that has the magic unfold in an audience member's hands, as if like the audience member is the one who's actually the magician. And there's just something so very special that brings the audience into that process. And to me, that's part of the whole goal of crowdsourcing. Certainly, when you work with a large number of volunteers, sometimes it isn't like the most efficient way to go about it. Maybe it would be better to have 10 people instead of 1,000 people. But you have to remember that the goal is to get people involved, not just to shortcut around how difficult a project is. And so I'm just going to sort of define what I see as crowdsourcing. A lot of different definitions out there. For me, it's a journalistic technique in which a reporter or researcher recruits volunteers who could be readers or members of your organization to participate in a mass news gathering or data gathering project. And often this involves distributing out low commitment research tasks to a large body of participants. Now, other news organizations or groups might define crowdsourcing differently. Often what they'll do is just solicit members of the public for tips or experiences or personal stories for a project. But to me, that's just, reporting. Like, that's just asking for feedback. That's not actually using the power of the crowd to build a research project that would be like more difficult or impossible with a small number of people. Okay, so I want to tell you a little bit about the Atlas. When we started off, our first pilot project just focused on the US-Mexico border and 23 counties, and we came up with 250 data points on our map. We are now at 9,000 data points, covering 4,000 law enforcement agencies around the country. That isn't like, 4,000 out of 18,000 is still a drop in the bucket, but this is the biggest data set of its kind out there. We've had over 1,000 students and volunteers contribute some sort of research to the project. And currently we only cover 12 different kinds of surveillance. We are looking at expanding, but we did have to triage in one way or another. I'm just sort of going to share this link in the chat if folks want to try this out, and I'll just sort of show you how this works. So I'm going to just post this here. So if you want to look at it yourself, now you come to the Atlas surveillance, and you can just basically put in a city, a state, a city, a state, a police department. Seth, where are you right now? If you want to share.
I'm in Brooklyn.
New York.
Yep.
All right. I am not sure what's going to come up with that. So I'm just.
It might just be New York City. Yeah.
I'm just going to try New York City.
Yeah.
So we do New York City, and you'll see that it starts telling you that New York Police Department has predictive policing, video analytics, license plate readers. We give everybody just like basically one sentence to tell them a little bit of information. And if they want more information, there's usually our source material links here. If they wanted to have a individual URL page to share, you can actually get that as well. Now, once you're in here, and you could have gotten here by just clicking search the data, you can actually just search by any particular technology. So if we wanted to see what police departments have drones in California, we can put California and select drones, and it'll show us 113 places that we've documented having drones in the United States. Now, we've also created a map, and I'll talk about this map in a little bit as well, because I think there's some important considerations here. It does take a second to load when I am on Zoom. But the map does very similar stuff to the database. It sort of maps everything out. We have it initially show this really messy version of things where it displays everything. I don't think that's the most useful, and I think most people don't. But it kind of has that shock factor, and also it would be really difficult to not start there. Instead, we ask people to sort of suggest that people click on one technology and see where that particular technology is mapped out across the country. So these are automated license plate readers. If I go ahead and click right here on Navajo County Sheriff's Office in Arizona, it gives you the same information with the links and the summary that you would have gotten from the text search. And sometimes it's nice to like overlay and stuff. I mean, really, though, this is mostly just a visualization. Some other things that have in here, we do have some special reports we've written about real-time crime centers, the southwestern border, and campus police, so surveillance technology on college campuses. Another interesting thing is that because we find so many data sets, some of which are useful to us, some of which aren't not, but are still within the area of surveillance, we actually have a data library of all the data sets. So if you were doing your own research, here are some other data sets that you could use in your own reporting and investigations. So yeah, it's a version of the map. So some notes on the mapping, and I'm going to just try to jump back out to, sorry, I'm just trying to go back into present mode. There we go. So some notes on the mapping. So we are using ArcGIS, which is a product of Esri. They have a free program that allows news organizations and nonprofits to access their commercial grade mapping technology for free. So we have been using them because we did need something pretty robust that could handle thousands and thousands of data points. We needed something that had its own mapping algorithm because it just needed to very quickly map things for us rather than us individually placing them. We also had to make some hard decisions about what we were actually going to map. Some people come to this map and they think, oh, we've mapped exactly where the surveillance technology is. Like if they click on a Stingray or a cell site simulator, which is a device that tracks cell phones, some people think that our data point is actually following the cell site simulator as it moves around the map. That is not the case. Originally, we were just doing it based on the name of the law enforcement agency and letting the algorithm place a point over the actual headquarters of the agency. But we found that that was making a lot of mistakes. One day we discovered that the Nebraska Department of Motor Vehicles was mapped on Marin County, California. And we were like, okay, well, that's not going to work. So now we just map it to the city and the state. So every data point on there is just showing you what city the technology is in, not any particular address. That's imperfect, but it's resulted in the least amount of errors. We still run into problems in states like Pennsylvania. Oh my gosh, Pennsylvania. If anybody here is from Pennsylvania, your geography just drives me nuts because you have townships and cities and townships within cities, and they all use the same name. And it's unclear which, a township might have a police department that has the same name as the city police department. Anyways, it's a big mapping horror, but I think we've really figured it out and gotten it. If you are working with a smaller data set, Google Maps works just fine. Google Maps is a wonderful tool for doing some quick mapping, a lot of customization you can do with Google Maps, but it doesn't really scale super big unless you get some sort of commercial account. So we weren't able to use Google Maps. There are some privacy concerns with third-party systems because data from the visit is going to a third party, but that's really very difficult to avoid unless you're going to invest significant resources to build something from the ground up. And I'm talking like a project jumping from what might be a few $1,000s internally to something that is suddenly in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, trying to get a firm to build you something from the ground up. You'll also notice in our map that we have some very specific colors chosen. Those are specifically to be more accessible to the different types of color blindness. However, when we originally launched the map, we had the map feature, the website, we had the map featured first and the text search featured second. And there was a lot of questions about whether the map was accessible to particularly visually impaired users. And it's not. Like, there's no real way to make a map that, particularly useful, particularly with this many data points, to somebody who is blind or severely visually impaired. That's why we also have the text version, and that's why we moved the text version into a more prominent space, because the text version will work with e-readers and for people who are blind. Whereas the map is just a visualization. It's just another way to look at the same information. Okay, so now I want to show you how we actually do the micro assignments. This is the system that we've built. It's a little bit janky, but it works, and it seems to produce pretty good results. When you come to report back, you are presented with this page where you have to put in your email address, and then we have a code that keeps people from DDoSing us. It's not like a password. It's just something that we give out to each group that's volunteering. And then you have the ability to choose which technology you want to research, as well as which state you want to research it in. We don't always have assignments for every state. So often it's better for people to just pick the technology. And then you get a research assignment. So this is what it might look like, where it's Atascosa County, Texas, and drones. And you're supposed to spend up to 20 minutes looking for drones in Atascosa County, Texas. And we tell people, if you do not find any information online, you're looking for news articles, government documents, press releases, whatever you can find. If you don't find something after 20 minutes, stop, because either one of our experts can find it more quickly, or there's nothing to find. So spend 20 minutes and then stop. And so you might say, well, Dave, where do these assignments come from? Originally, when we first tried it during our pilot project, we just gave, sorry, I haven't looked at the chat. There are some questions about ArcGIS. I believe you can do a self-hosted version of ArcGIS, but we do not. Ours is through their system, and then we have embedded it in here. The first time visiting, you'll get a pop-up that says you're accepting the privacy policy for ArcGIS. But it is useful in that you can embed it in other sites. I mean, people can take our map and embed it on their own site. It's just, sorry, I've just moved back forward. So we found it pretty good. So when we first did the first pilot project with the 23 counties along the US-Mexico border, I had like 75 students to work with that semester. And we just gave each student like a county and a list of technologies to look for. So we're like, you are in Pima County, go look in Tucson and see if Tucson Police Department has any of these 15 technologies. And the students found it very frustrating because, most of the time they didn't have these technologies, and they would just keep searching and searching and searching and never find anything. So instead, we try to generate assignments that are based on some sort of likelihood that the student is going to, or the volunteer is going to find a piece of information. So we subscribe to a commercial procurement site called GovSpend, which is proprietary, but they let us use their data to generate our assignments. So we'll go into GovSpend, and GovSpend will generate a list of everyone who's bought body-worn cameras, and then we fill our assignments with those cities and the fact that they have body-worn cameras, and then the students then go try to find news articles related to that. Or what we might do is find an existing list of agencies that use a technology that already exists but doesn't have enough context for us to really put it into the atlas. So we might get a list of everyone, like a list of like 100 places that are probably using license plate reader data, but all we have is their name and the fact they're probably using it. We don't have any context, any articles, any more information. So we might load that in. We might identify agencies in a state that have a law in place that requires them to disclose on their website, or we might pick a research activity that is highly likely to produce results just by the nature of the technology. For example, body-worn cameras are pretty ubiquitous in the United States. It seems like most police departments use them. So we can just generate a list of like 50 places that we don't have any data for in, say, Minnesota, and just have people look for body-worn cameras because there's a good chance they're going to find something. So we're going to come, I want to just show you a couple other examples of crowdsourcing that I really like. And I'll just sort of show you here that are kind of related to similar issues to what EFF does. And this one might be broken now. So let me just refresh this to see if it's, all right, this one may not be functioning anymore, but I'll show you, Amnesty International did one with surveillance in New York City, where you would come to the site and you would get a image from Google Street View, and you need to look for certain surveillance cameras. And so then you would put it here, and then you would tag camera, and you would say what the camera looked like. So in this case, it is this, and it is a PTZ dome camera. And there you go. And then you could look for another one and see if there's another one. And I don't know if that's one or not, but yeah. So then I'd say I have tagged all the cameras, and then you would submit. So this is something that they did, and very successfully. It was it was a very short period where they only did it for, I think, maybe a few days, but lots of people participated and helped them map out surveillance cameras in New York City. Now, let's see if I can get this to skip. So this one may not be working anymore, unfortunately. This is an older program, but really Muckrock had gotten thousands and thousands and thousands of pages from Donald Rumsfeld's essentially memo diary. And you would go to this site, it would give you one page, and you grab metadata from it. You say, what was the date listed on it? You summarize the entry. You put some tags in, you say if there's anything notable, and then you hit submit. So they were able to review a ton of records, all very quickly using volunteer labor. All right. So what are the benefits of crowdsourcing if you're thinking about doing this for your organization? Well, one is that it can be really helpful in reviewing a large amount of data very quickly or efficiently. When I was a reporter before joining EFF, there was a ton of WikiLeaks documents that had come out through the Cablegate release. I mean, it may have been just like a few hundred documents, and I recruited like 6 or 7 volunteers from our community, and we split them up and we went through it. We were able to get through and index everything in like a day or two, which would have taken me probably at least a week on my own, if not longer, to go through the data. But the other benefits are actually in that you're engaging readers in the process. They are, your readers and members are getting a better understanding of the issues because they're digging into it themselves, and they're understanding the difficulties they might wonder why you don't have all the answers. They start to discover why you don't have all the answers because the government is stonewalling or media isn't covering it correctly. And they just sort of, are able to dive in and experience what you experience. Also, they're going to have a greater stake in your project. And then also it'll ultimately expand the online sharing of the final project. If you, had 50 people participate, those are 50 people who are going to share the final product with their networks because they're proud of it. So some lessons that I've learned. Actually, I just want to share one more anecdote of like getting people involved in the process. One of my favorite sort of anecdotes was during Occupy, many years ago now. I was in San Diego, and I had put in a public records request with the city for all complaints filed, or all complaints or comments filed with the city related to Occupy. And it ended up generating, like 2,000 pages of documents. And I was able to bring some of the members from the Occupy movement who had never seen a public records request, who had never seen public documents. Occupy was their first time getting involved in a social movement. And I was able to bring them up into City Hall spread out all the documents in the table, and we went through them all together. And I really felt like that helped inform people and bring them into the process. Anyway, some lessons I've learned about crowdsourcing, take them or leave them. These are things that I found helpful that I think that you might find helpful as well. So first of all, it's just being very careful about picking a project that would benefit from crowdsourcing. If it is something that you and a friend can do very quickly and efficiently in a couple of hours, it probably doesn't make sense to use that for a crowdsourcing project. Really look for data sets or document dumps that can be broken up into low commitment tasks. Really think in terms of like, what can somebody do in a half hour or in an hour, as opposed to like trying to get people to commit to doing something for like 5 hours or a weekend. You're going to want to actually design and come up with your promotional plan and recruitment plan to get people involved. And then also just make sure that you're really projecting enthusiasm throughout this process. I find that I always have to really, not only turn on my on switch, but crank up my enthusiasm volume, because if I'm not projecting how cool I think this project is, they're not really going to, the volunteers are not going to actually feel that excited about it either. So one thing to think about is you're probably going to need a form for people to fill out with the things they find. You have to really carefully design that and workshop that, get feedback on it. And just remember that the more options you have, the more opportunities there are for people to make mistakes and misinterpret your instructions and misinterpret the questions. And so you really have to give clear instruction, not just in writing, but in how you train people and onboarding. Just because you really do have to expect for people to make mistakes. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. And then also being very clear with the expectations for the participants that their work may not show up in publication. They might look up something and it may not be useful in the end, and they should be okay with that, because part of the reason of having so many people involved is to comb through and look for the gems and separate all of the dirt. You should also have low expectations. So you should, if people RSVP for a crowdsourcing event, or, you should know that RSVPs do not equal attendance. If 100 people sign up for it and 10 people show up, count that as a victory. Like people tend to overcommit, particularly in an age where people are used to just hitting on a Facebook like invite, just saying like, maybe I'm coming, because they don't want to commit to, or they don't want to say they're not coming. You shouldn't expect and plan for a high error rate. So you're going to want to have a fact-checking process in place, because people are going to make mistakes left and right, and you just got to be prepared for that. And some of the ways you can do that is building in redundancy. So if you have an assignment, making sure that it's never just one person who does that assignment or checks that assignment. And just don't get frustrated with participants who get things wrong, because if they're getting something wrong, it's probably in your instructions or in your form and not on their part. Another thing to do is to support what I call super volunteers. So every once in a while, there will be somebody who volunteers who doesn't just want to do it for an hour, but wants to do this for weeks. And they'll be really, really high producers of research. And you should really nurture them and cherish them and figure out ways for them to help more and more, because really that actually helps bring up the average overall. And yeah, like I said, there is going to be a high error rate. There is going to be a lot of typos. There'll be a lot of things that are not uniform. So you need a budget and a lot of time for fact checking, reviewing, and cleaning any data that comes in. So when you're writing about your results with crowdsourcing, you should really be transparent and describe how crowdsourcing worked, so that the reader of your project knows how this came together. But you also need to be transparent about the drawbacks. You have to be transparent that doing stuff with open source intelligence, that is like stuff that's on the internet, or doing things with volunteers, is just going to result, will often result in some errors or things that need to be fixed. And there's only going to be a certain amount of there's going to be a margin of error for everything if it is based on open source intelligence and crowdsourcing. In addition to promoting people, promoting it to people who get involved with the project, you also need to come up with your plan for distributing the report and how you're going to credit the participants, and how you're going to provide participants with suggestions for how to share it on social media. And then finally, you never want to leave the participants just hanging at the end of this. You do want to follow up with them. You do want to say thank you, maybe even give swag if you have, to some of the high producers to just make them feel appreciated. And then finally, you really need to be prepared for success. I told you, have your expectations low, but this stuff can get very popular very quickly, and it can suddenly be overwhelming in the number of volunteers who want to participate. And so you need to figure out, can you scale this up? Is it just you and one other person working on the project? Can you actually legitimately manage 1,000 volunteers? If not, you really need to manage those expectations for the volunteers and let them know, we are short-staffed on this. We can only support you to a certain amount. We can't respond to every email of yours. It really is just sort of being prepared in case this really does go big for you. So if any questions have come up, I can answer them. I know I talk a little bit fast, so I can repeat anything that comes up, or that came up. But if not, folks are willing, more than willing to try out an assignment, and I can show you how it works. Seth, has anything popped up?
Not a ton in the chat while you were going, but if folks have any questions now, please write them in the chat and I can read them out loud for everybody to hear. Or if you'd like to come off mute, I can promote you to a panelist and you can just jump in on the discussion. Dave, would you be able to paste into the chat the assignment details so folks can have it right
Absolutely.
there for them?
All right, so I'm going to do that right now, and you all can just follow along. Okay.
Awesome. We've got a question from Nick in the chat asking, are there ways to monitor the surveillance strategies used in these scenarios? Or I guess this is related to the previous comment that a lot of their activism is centered around fossil fuel pipeline projects and new lithium mining projects. And there is a lot of policing and surveillance involved in those activities.
So we've taken a look at this as well. There's been a lot of stuff that came up around DAPL that raised our awareness as well as our concerns. What we hope is with our Atlas of Surveillance project that you would use that as a starting point to look at what local law enforcement agencies are in the area or that are being deployed to that zone. Then you can just look up what we know they have in their arsenal, but you're probably going to want to follow that up with actual public records requests where you can ask for, logs of when things were used, when things were checked out. Every time a drone is flown, usually they have to write a flight report afterwards saying, when was it flown, who flew it, what was the outcome, and you putting in requests for that sort of thing. I don't know if anybody actually creating a master database of things that have been used specifically in these pipeline scenarios. But certainly every time one of these protests come up, the first thing I do is go and look at the Atlas surveillance and see what we know people are using, and being sure to keep track of what agency resources are being shared. So with Dakota Access, you saw police departments from all over, I think even from the next state over, coming in and converging on there. And so you really have to not just look at what the local sheriff and the local police department are doing, but everywhere. Our technology is more widely used in urban areas versus rural areas. So what we see is that drones are very common in rural areas. They're used in urban areas as well. Any urban area that has money is just going to start throwing money at every technology. And so you're going to see a major city and you're going to expect them to have 5 or 6 or 10 things on our list. That's not the case for rural areas that don't have a lot of money. And so what you see them really focusing on is drones. First of all, they'll often get grants for body-worn cameras. And those are kind of the two main things. Depending on where they're located, and you might see license plate readers, particularly if they're close to a state border, say a state border, particularly between a state that has marijuana legalization next to a state that doesn't have marijuana legalization, you might notice that they might have license plate readers tracking people coming in to see whether they're coming across the state lines with, cannabis or large amounts of money or that kind of thing. But it's different. So, but I don't think you're expecting to see cell site simulators in rural areas that often, just because they're super expensive and they're really more used for tracking people in limited geographic areas, not over like hundreds and hundreds of miles. Okay. Does that answer your question, Nick? There we go. All right. I'll just go ahead and show you how this works. I think I posted in the chat the information that you need. But you would just come to a report back and you'd put in your email address. And the only reason for this email address is that it sends you a copy of your assignment in case it closes out. And I put Greenpeace. Don't select a state because you may just find yourself like jumping around a bit trying to find a state with the assignment. But I would do body-worn cameras to start. The reason I say body-worn cameras to start is that most police departments, advertise when they've got it, or at the very least, most police departments have Facebook pages, and you can just go look at pictures of police officers and find out whether they have body-worn cameras or not. So I'm going to come in here and do it. And oh, I need to cancel this drone one because it's still giving me drones. 1 second. All right. Greenpeace, body-worn cameras. And then I give myself an assignment here. Okay, so Palos Verdes State's Police Department. I'm supposed to spend like up to 20 minutes kind of just Googling around, see if they have body-worn cameras. So I have here, they were eyeing body-worn cameras in 2015. Looks like there might be a operations study here. And I got their Facebook page, some of their document here. We can see, so police operations study. And if I do just search through here, and is this not, yeah, there we go. So as of 2017, they did not have those cameras. Let's see if they have since then. I'm going to go to the photos of the police officers. And here we go. Very clearly on this dude right here, body-worn camera, body-worn camera. So that's link number one that I can start with. I mean, generally, this one's too old. So I'm generally looking to see if I can find up to 3 links that provide context. If I only find one's good enough. But I generally tell people to try to find up to 3. And it's useful to use a combination of quotation marks to try to get at the different ways they might have used the term. So body-worn camera, body worn. It's like all, BWC, that kind of thing. You can also go to the website and of the agency and just type in, body camera and see if anything comes up. Search pages for government websites are usually pretty awful, but sometimes they're okay. So here's some stuff here that I can come up with. And let's see, paywalled. Okay, so here we have a policy document. Let's see, does it say body camera? All right, what does it say? So they are authorized to carry body-worn cameras. Doesn't tell me a lot. Let's see this document here. All right, to purchase WatchGuard body-worn cameras. And all right, so here we go. Here's the document we're looking for. So here is a document that I'm talking about getting body-worn cameras and when they got body-worn cameras. They got the brand of body-worn cameras, and we've confirmed they have them because we have the cameras right here on their chests. And all right, so this is a good document here. And if I wanted, I could see, is this the minutes or the agenda? If you wanted, you could dig around just to get the minutes to confirm that they purchased it. But seeing as we actually have like visual confirmation here on their chests, it's good enough for me. Okay, so here's my assignment here. I would come to the Atlas form. And again, there's a lot going on here. And, there's some ways that we could probably streamline this, but it works. And ultimately, that's your metric, is whether it's actually people are getting through it okay and actually providing research that's usable. So I have a reference number here for people to pop in. Did I find something to report? Yes, I did. The agency is the Palos Verdes Estates Police Department. They're in Palos Verdes Estates, and they're in California. And they are a police department, and the city is municipal. And no other agencies were mentioned, so I can click next. I was researching body-worn cameras. The vendor is WatchGuard. And then you got to summarize what we learned in about 2 sentences. And like we can say, this was April 2022, and this is May. So let me just make sure I read this real quick. So they've done audio recordings since 2005. All right. Okay, so I'm going to say the Palos Verdes Estates Police Department purchased WatchGuard body-worn cameras in 2022. And then I can just pop in these links. So here's this one, and the source is the Palos Verdes Estates Police Department Facebook page. The date was May 28th, 2022, and it is a social media link. And then I would just do the same thing for this other one. And the source is the city of Palos Verdes Estates. We got like 3 minutes left. I see there's 4 things in the chat, but I haven't opened it. Seth, is there any questions in there?
Folks just asking for a link, and then someone just asked, are the tasks for volunteers distributed like in an automated way, or are they manually done by a coordinator?
They are automated. They are automated. So we upload, maybe like 200 or 300 in a batch at a time. And so they're just in there. And so when somebody hits it, we're not supervising them. They're just given an assignment. And then the final page is just asking if you have bugs or you had any confidence in this. And then you hit submit, and there's a little warning that you have to come back here and hit finish the assignment. This is because, one of the issues with being EFF is that we are very privacy conscious, and we did not want to directly connect. So we didn't want to connect our system to the Google form because on the report back side, we require people's email addresses, and we didn't want to share that externally. And so we didn't want people to, on the Google form side, to have to give any information other than what normally comes from browsing using Google. So nobody has to put in their email address or name or anything into Google. But as a result, the 2 sites don't exactly communicate with each other. So there's this additional step where you have to come back and close your assignment on report back. Little janky, but only put in as much only put in as much energy as is worth the outcome.
Amazing. That's like perfectly timed. We've got 1 minute left, so I hope folks take 20 minutes of a day coming up soon to fill out one of these assignments. And yeah, please be in touch if you do it, if you like it. Hopefully folks can apply this kind of methodology to their topics. I don't know, Dave, if you wanted to put any contact information for yourself or where people can find you if they want to reach out to you.
Yeah, I had a slide on it, but I'm not going to screen share again at this point. But my email address is dm@eff.org. On Twitter, I'm @massive, although I'm trying to wean myself off Twitter these days, so it may take me a few days to get back to you if you message me there.
Sounds wonderful. Well, I'll wrap us up here. Hopefully see folks in the next session starting in about a minute. And thank you so much, Dave. This was wonderful. And thanks everybody for joining us. See you soon. Bye-bye.